Admiral Michael Rogers was the Chief of Central Security Services and is the Chief of Central Security Services and Director of the NSA and leads U.S. Cyber Command. Prior to leading Cyber Command, he was the commander of the 10th Fleet and U.S. Fleet Cyber Command. Please give a round of applause to Admiral Rogers.
Good afternoon, everyone. I realize I am the last individual between you and departure, so I know I have a responsibility here to make sure you all get out on time and safely into the traffic that is Washington, D.C. Well, first, I want to thank you for your willingness to come together to talk about an important set of topics, cybersecurity and its broad ramifications. I want to thank INSS for sponsoring this. And one of the reasons why I wanted to do this was it's important to me that we always remember the global nature of the cyber challenge, and that multiple nations are dealing with similar threats and the same activities that we see here in the United States, you see in a host of other nations around the world. And we all are collectively trying to work our way through how can we ensure the security and safety of our citizens and the networks and the data that is important to them and their ability to execute their day-to-day life, let alone what we try to do as a government or military in executing our missions. And I think that as we work our way through the solution sets as to how we're going to do that, that remembering the global dynamic for this problem set is an important part of moving forward. That the solutions that we come up with have got to be capable of extending potentially beyond our individual borders. Because this threat doesn't recognize borders. The lines that we have drawn on the globe that represent the history of many very proud nations, the challenge, I think, in some ways for us, we'll put that microphone up. Okay, Roger, should you get closer to the microphone? Is that cyber does not recognize geography. And so we've got to come up with solutions that enable us to deal with that phenomena and recognize that that phenomena is part of this man-made world and man-made challenge that we're dealing with. As the commander of the United States Cyber Command, I'm a Department of Defense military operational commander leading an organization with 3 primary missions. The first, to operate and defend the department's networks. The second, to generate capacity that we can apply to support combatant commanders and our senior policy makers to provide a broad range of options as we're trying to deal with the problem sets around us. And thirdly, if directed by the President or the Secretary of Defense, it's to apply our capabilities to help defend critical infrastructure within the United States. Many of you are aware the federal government has designated 16 different segments in the private sector where that infrastructure has been identified as having significant implications for our nation's security. As the director of the National Security Agency, 2 primary missions. I lead an organization that's a foreign intelligence organization focused on using signals intelligence to generate insights and knowledge as to what nation-state groups and actors are doing outside the United States that is of concern to our security and the safety of our citizens, as well as our friends and allies around the world. And at the same time, NSA also has a significant information assurance or computer network defense mission. And it's that mission for NSA that continues to grow significantly. So I find myself, like many of you, working this computer network defense issue, both from an individual responsible for ensuring that the networks of our department, the entity that I'm a part of, are protected. At the same time, trying to generate capacity and capability that can be applied more broadly in the defense of the networks, both within the DoD, but potentially outside the DoD. And so I find myself looking at this problem set from multiple perspectives. Like many of you, there's no silver bullet here. I long since came to the conclusion, if you think there's a single technology that's going to solve this problem set, I don't see it. If you think there's a single specific technical solution that's going to solve all this, I don't see it. If you think one particular group has all the answers, I have yet to find that group, and I don't pretend to have all the answers with the 2 organizations that I lead. Rather, I come to the conclusion over time that cyber is all about the power of partnerships, and about our ability to bring together the government, the private sector, and partner across borders is really going to be the key to deal with this challenge, because it's not going to go away. This is not a short-term phenomenon. This is not a challenge where I think we can say to ourselves, oh, don't worry, this is just a passing phenomenon. It only lasted a few years. Everything's going to be fine in the future. We're watching the world around us fundamentally change. And the challenge for all of us, I think, is when it comes to cybersecurity, how do we recognize that change, acknowledge it, anticipate it, and get ahead of it? And do it in a way that enables us to ensure the security of our systems and our systems, and our data. And to remember when we're doing this, because we're all part of democracies, we do it in a way that ensures the security and safety of our citizens. And we do not do it in a way that overrides our basic rights. It goes against everything we stand for as a nation. So we've got to figure out how are we going to do this. And increasingly we're in a world where technology is outpacing both our legal and our policy frameworks. And so we've got to figure out how we're going to deal with this. And like I said, there are no easy answers here. A lot of it, when it comes to computer network defense, is very basic blocking, as we would say in the Navy, blocking and tackling. Very basic fundamentals, cyber hygiene, educating your workforce, and ensuring that you've got a fundamentally sound network structure. Even as you acknowledge, no structure is perfect. Another thing I'm struck by when I started my journey in this mission set, I can remember thinking to myself, well, the focus is making sure nobody ever gets in. And increasingly I've come to the conclusion you must be ready that despite your best efforts, the potential exists that someone is going to get in. So what are you going to do about it? Because the answer cannot be, well, I'm just going to shut everything down. I'm sure it's true for all of you. Hey, the Department of Defense cannot stop its operations. Just close all our connectivity, close all our networks down, and hope the opponents leave and go somewhere else, find a different target. That is not going to work. And so increasingly, that's a very different mindset I find myself thinking about. So if they manage to penetrate, how do we make sure that they're not successful, that they can't move, that they can't extract? And we very quickly minimize this, and we deal with it in a very aggressive, proactive, timely way. And we get ahead of the problem set. That's a very different mindset. As a military commander, it's not without its challenges. But it's a challenge on the other hand, I will be honest, I find very invigorating. And another fundamental to me is, I remind the team, that the teams that I lead, you can have the greatest technical structure in the world with the most in-depth technical knowledge, with the most multiple layers of defense. But they'll never forget the human dynamic in all of this. Because while the technology is important, at its heart, those keyboards are used, good or bad, by men and women. And this is also an area where I think it's an interesting challenge, because when we give you access to a keyboard, you represent a network. You now represent both a potential point of opportunity, but based on the choices that you make, you now are a potential point of vulnerability. And in the world that we're living in now, we give everyone access to a keyboard, because networks have become so foundational to our ability to execute our missions within the DoD, our daily lives at home, whatever job you have, whatever organization you're a part of. It's true for all of us. The network and access to information and the ability to rapidly disseminate insights, whether you do it for personal reasons, I want to see pictures of my children wherever I am, or if it's something work-related. We're living in a world where we increasingly are now dependent on that ability to do that in a timely way. We certainly do that in DoD. We have built a structure where we can globally push data almost instantaneously across a huge swath of commanders and users. And we've got to be able to continue to do that. Because if we can't do that, we lose a really strong advantage for us. And so there's plenty of challenges out there. There's no silver bullet. So I don't come to you today with, so do these 10 things and the problem is fixed. I don't believe that. This is going to take a lot of hard work. We've got to roll our sleeves up. And we're going to have to acknowledge that this will take a sustained long-term effort that's going to be multidimensional in the way we do it. There will be a technical aspect to that solution set. There will be a human dimension of that solution set. There are organizational implications for us as a nation, as a company, as a group of individuals in your personal lives. How do you organize? How do you prioritize? All of that is true for this. So it takes men and women working together, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to be here today, because I'm very appreciative of the fact that INSS and the men and women who have been here over the course of the day are willing to engage in that kind of dialogue and try to figure out how are we going to move this forward. With that, I'm much more interested on what's on your minds, because I don't want to sit here and just talk at you. So what questions do you have for me?
Admiral Rogers will take 3 questions and I'll come to you, so just raise your hand.
Hope you get somebody standing in the microphone already. Take advantage, recognize that aggressive individual.
The mic's not working.
I'll repeat the question.
Nathan Lowe from California. I
Thank you.
heard you speak 2 years ago at the FT conference in New York, and it was wonderful again today. Thank you for
Thank you, sir.
defending our nation.
2 questions. One, we had an earlier speaker today who said, we have all these computer scientists around the country, we don't have standards, why can't we enforce or request every computer science department at every college to have a class or 2 about cybersecurity as part of the graduation requirement, which would just generally raise the standard level? That's number 1. Number 2, as a proud American, you're here at an Israeli-type conference. Israel has 420 cyber companies. It is beyond challenging for Israeli companies to sell to the United States government. They have to go through an American company, and there has to be all sorts of stuff. At some point, when will the U.S. government consider that Israel's cyber companies are more of an asset than a risk, and versus ISIS or whoever else, and stop putting up obstacles that would lead to freer commerce and quicker implementation of cyber defenses to defend this country?
So let me take the second one first. I'm a military operational commander, and so I can't honestly tell you, hey, how in the end do we get to the position that you've articulated. For me, respectfully, that's just not my focus, it's not my mission. So in no way should you take that, boy, he sure seems to be trying to minimize it. That's not my point at all. I just try to be very honest with people. If there's some things that I am focused on, that I have responsibility for, that I have knowledge and some level of expertise or experience in, and with others I don't, and this is one that falls into the latter category. I will say, in my duties as both Commander of Cyber Command and then Director of the National Security Agency, I acknowledge and recognize that others outside the United States have value that should be brought to bear on this problem set. So it's one of the reasons why we have a variety of international relations designed to help us do that for both these jobs. Because I acknowledge there is value and insight to be gained outside the United States on this problem set. And I'm interested in tapping into as much value and insight as I can. Yeah, Nathan, what was the first one again?
About requiring colleges that teach
Oh yeah,
computer science to have a prerequisite of cyber hygiene.
So, I mean, clearly every university is going to decide what works best for their program. I'll tell you what because I spend a lot of time in visiting universities, in no small part because, quite frankly, they are in some ways one of the initial access points for the workforce that we're trying to build. So I try to spend time with them about, hey, here's the kind of skills, realizing you are producing students who are designed to work for a variety of employers and a variety of different functions within the cyber arena. But from my perspective, here's the kinds of things that we're looking for. So as you're looking to create a workforce that potentially would be optimized for the kinds of missions and functions in the United States Cyber Command or the National Security Agency, here's the kind of things we're looking for. And I will say when it comes to the defensive side, one of the points I try to make with the academic world is, it's funny, when I meet new individuals in the workforce, and I'll sometimes sit and talk to them, or I'll watch some of their initial work, if they're particularly focused on the defensive side, I am still struck by the number of individuals who create capability and then just seem to bolt on security as an afterthought. And when I look at that work, I'll say to myself, you really just focused on functionality, didn't you? You didn't get to the defensive part of your structure until the very end. Hey, sir, yeah, that's... Guys, I'm telling you that for the future, we've got to bring together both functionality and security is core design characteristics. And it can't be just, well, it's one or it's the other. Because trying to bolt on or bake on security as an afterthought, or after you've created particularly complex systems, you just significantly increase the probability of a successful defensive outcome. And we just cannot collectively, afford that anymore. Sir?
Good afternoon. Senator Round from South Dakota has introduced a bill calling on the administration to undergo sort of a net assessment, thinking about strategically harnessing cyber offensively and defensively. I was curious what is being done in this area to date and what is planned independent of the piece of legislation.
So let me talk about what DoD is doing writ large. If you read the DoD cyber strategy, which we promulgated at an unclass level in April of 2015, in that document, we specifically talk about the importance of deterrence, the fact that we've got to fundamentally change the dynamic in which we're operating today and in the past. Because quite frankly, if we're just going to sit here and respond to a series of penetrations, that becomes very resource intensive. It puts us in a reactive mode, and it means we're always responding. I would like us to see, can we get to an environment where there is a broader understanding of what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, and that potentially, as you saw in the Sony case, if you engage in activity that violates the law, international norms, and is unacceptable, that there will be a price to pay for that. And you saw that play out in the Sony case, for example, where the United States announced a series of economic sanctions against North Korea in the aftermath of North Korea's attack against the Sony Corporation. We'll see how that model plays out over time. I also remind people, when you think about, because your question in some way goes to the idea of deterrence, we also need to think about deterrence more broadly than just cyber. And merely because we see activity in the cyber arena doesn't mean that the response has to be in cyber. I think we should think broadly and play to our nation's strengths. And cyber is just one element of those potential strengths.
Stephen Thomas, Cyberbid, just briefly, you tied back on the offensive and the defensive worlds coming together, particularly in your agencies. How do you see that manifesting itself in the commercial world as we start to see some commercial technologies beginning to apply themselves on the offensive side of the ball?
So we'll see how this plays out over time. It's an area that, I watch. Let me put it this way. What I've often said is cyber in some ways already has many of the characteristics of the Wild Wild West. And more people putting on a gun and going out in the street really, I don't think is in the best long-term interest. I don't think it really worked out so well based on the Westerns I've seen always. And so I'm always very concerned about the application of force outside the structure of the nation state. I just think we need to, not that there are historic precedents, there are no first acknowledged that. But it's something I think we need to be very careful about here. We really need to step back as a nation and ask ourselves, are we really comfortable going down that road? Because there's a lot of second and third implications. It's another example to me of, again, we have to think globally, we got to think broadly here.
I believe we've run out of time. Thank you.
I'll tell you what, I will take, to be fair.
One more?
I'll take it.
Thank you very much, Director Rogers. It's good to see you.
Hello, Alan. How are you doing?
Hi, thanks. A few quick questions. On the Egypt Air flight, can you tell us whether you've seen any evidence for terrorism, and if so, anything pointing to ISIS?
Alan, I'm not going to talk about this because there's an ongoing activity.
Thank you. That was question number one. Question number two. I had to try.
I was going to say, you waited for that question.
I did. You have undertaken a campaign against ISIS now for several months, and I was just wondering how do you measure success in that area? What are your metrics for measuring success of that cyber campaign?
This is another one in an unclassified open forum that I'm not going to get into a broad discussion about. I apologize, this is just not something I'm going to end up talking about.
Okay, then my final question, which I'm sure you can answer.
We're going to answer this one.
This is a good one. You recently took
How
a
old are
trip.
you? I'm good.
You took a trip to Israel in like the last month or two. Can you just tell us what your goal was, what your mission was, and what came out of it? How would you describe that trip?
So as I've said, we partner with a variety of nations around the world. Israel remains an important partner for our nation as a whole. It remains a partner that I believe is important to both the jobs that I have. It's a partnership that we are focused on over time, and so I was there to make sure that that message is conveyed. Hey, for me as the director and as the commander, this is a long-term relationship that I think is important to both entities. I want to create value both for Israel as well as for us. And so we work through a set of common problems, cybersecurity being one of those. Thanks very much. You got 1 out of 3.
Wow. Thank you, Admiral Rogers. This
I
was...
tell you what, we'll do one more. It's-
Oh, wow. Well, you guys are lucky today.
Nobody else run up to the microphone. There
Should the Joe Basinski from the state of Maryland. In your recent testimony in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee, both Senator McCain and Senator Reid supported making your command a major combatant command. Now, with the state of Virginia coming to the conclusion that they have one agency servicing 54 out of 56 departments, and that improves their cybersecurity as well as coordination. You seem to have multiple points of contact between DHS and your command and others. Will your move to Major Combatant Command help that integration of effort?
So first of all, whether or not United States Cyber Command becomes a combatant command is a decision way outside Admiral Rogers. Multiple issues, multiple aspects of it. It'll work its way through the system, and collectively, the structure will ultimately make a decision. And as you said, I've been asked about it. I've said, yes, I believe ultimately in the long term it is the right thing, but I acknowledge it's not my decision. There's a lot of factors that go into it. What I tell the team is, look, folks, we got a mission. We need to focus on the mission. Let others worry about the things that they're accountable for. We got to focus on doing the mission. In terms of its coordination with DHS, we have clearly articulated roles and responsibilities. Really no overlap there. Clear delineation between DOD and DHS as to what those roles are. We're here as part of a broader federal effort. We acknowledge that. We support DHS in their efforts. I acknowledge that. We try to be good teammates with DHS. I don't think, regardless of what level U.S. Cyber Command is, a sub-unified or a combatant commander, I don't see those fundamentals changing, and the fact that we need to be a good teammate and partner with DHS and others, I don't see that changing. It's still foundational to the structure and to the mission sets for us. With that, again, thank you all very, very much for your time. Have a safe trip.